So thank you all for coming to my talk about my work that's here, and also some background as well, because that is relevant, obviously, to what you see here. Sheila was at the Palette Club, I think, in April, so some of you have actually heard a little bit about my history and you didn't realise it was the same person, because my work's changed over the time, you know, as it does, and also on me, because I was born in the Isle of Man and ran away up to art school when I was 18. Literally, that is the truth. But I never got over not being by the sea. So it's taken me 35 years to get back to the sea. So this is like a profound, the whole thing is really profound for me. My working day starts with me walking on the seafront. So I normally walk, whatever the weather. I live at Milford-on-Sea, along the top, looking out at the Needles, at the sea, and it's almost, because it's very quiet apart from this time of year, it's almost like a meditation in a way, because it clears my head of all the, in order to then go back to the studio and hopefully make some of these. And then the way I work, I used to be very kind of rigid, which I'll talk about my previous watercolours, where I would paint every day, so I'd do set amount of time, and the reason for that was because I wanted to master the watercolour techniques. But the more I freed up my work and freed up my ideas, then I'm much more fluid in the way I work. So generally I'll work in a series and I'll produce a lot of work in one go, and then there'll be almost like a desert of nothing, which is really hard. But that's that, it's like a refilling, I think. The observatory on the seawall, which was a marvellous residency, yeah? So these wonderful buildings, did you see them? Yeah, so Nicola was artist in residence there before me, and I worked there for a month. It was so intense working in that same spot, from the landscape, or the feeling of the landscape, I think, more than actually just the landscape. It completely got me more rooted. It made me feel more rooted here, which I think is important. So I really got the feel of the area and the nature, and it was wonderful being in touch, you know, with the elements. So it wasn't actually painted there. I brought some one sketchbook from there, because I did paint on the spot, and I do that. But the bigger work is always made in the studio, not from reference. It just comes from in here, with whatever arrives at that time. Is that whatever that feeling is? This is a book of the work I did probably 15, 20 years ago, and I'd made this grand decision to master watercolour, because at art school you don't do watercolour. It wasn't considered like a proper medium. I don't know if anyone heard, there's an artist called Jenny somebody, she was on Woman's Hour 2 days ago, and she's got an exhibition at the Union Gallery in Edinburgh, and she was taught by Elizabeth Blackadder, you know, the flower painter, who's had a massive influence on her, and she was explaining about, it was very interesting, about watercolour, and how she would feel slightly embarrassed when she'd say she was a watercolourist. And I was driving along as I was listening to this, and I thought, yes, I know that feeling, because often, you know, I don't know, we all have different ideas in our heads, and my idea in my head, that was obviously some residue, that if you were a watercolour artist, you're not a proper artist, even though that's what I do, and I teach watercolour and I go on about watercolour, and it's all done in a watercolour way. I've obviously still got some slight thing about, it's not real painting, but it's not like oil painting or acrylics. But the joke is that it's such a hard medium to work with, because you can't control it. And I think I'm most interested in is kind of honesty. As a person, I'm interested in honesty, and then it goes into the work. So if you work in watercolour, it's quite honest because there's no hiding place, if that makes sense. And it's quite vulnerable. So it's like you're really revealing what's in there, or possibly out there, because I think that in many respects, I believe you're kind of just a vehicle for whatever. You're the vehicle that makes this work. Because but then I got to the stage where I realised I was just using the flowers as a vehicle for the paint, if that makes sense. So I still do love flowers, but it was more the paint I was interested in. So I decided then to get out of my comfort zone, and I started experimenting with paint in a more abstract way. And I honestly didn't show anything for probably 3 years because I made so many messes, and it was so it wasn't controlled enough. It was just a mess, yeah. And then eventually this sort of thing that was vaguely but small, about this size, started appearing, and then the work has kind of progressed from there. They're a mixture of watercolour and acrylic. So the acrylic is used exactly like watercolour, so I'll mix a whole huge pot of acrylic like watercolour, but sometimes it'll be both. Often it's acrylic, like on this one. I think that's watercolour up there. That's probably a bit more acrylic down. That's definitely acrylic, because it's easier to mix up a large amount of paint with acrylic than it is with watercolour, because you can get more of the intensity with the pigments. So I mean, because acrylic does behave. The colours are different. It behaves in the same way as watercolour if you water it down. So I kind of class it as it's just another form of watercolour.